All right. Can you tell us, Salman, what inspired you to start Mosaic?
Mosaic from the start has been a very mission oriented and very mission driven company. And that mission has always been, how do we create places that people love? And how do we make those places widely available?
How many projects and developments are you guys currently undertaking?
Yeah, so we're primarily focusing on the emerging build to rent asset class within the residential sector, which we'll double click on that. But just to like paint a picture of the typical projects that we build, they're not onesie twosie homes. We're typically building entire communities, entire neighborhoods. Our typical sweet spot projects are usually anywhere between 150 and 200 units. Usually single family detached, although we'll sometimes do like townhome product, three, four, five, six plexes as well, and varying types of architecture within them. Again, going back to our mission statement of not just building the exact same thing over and over and over again.
So, what is super interesting is like, what is your USP when you speak with a developer? Like, why would they choose you instead of like traditional way of doing it?
Because I'm curious also, Salman, because just from my experience and knowing how these developments work, they're usually speaking to a number of general contractors, interviewing them, et cetera, et cetera. And then, I mean, you guys like are very different. So when you come in, it must be like, oh, wow, okay, this is a slightly different approach. So yeah, if you could talk to that.
Totally. Well, first of all, I'll tell you what they don't look at is they don't, and I hope we're going to spend a lot of time kind of talking about the technology approaches and stuff like that we've been focusing on. That's obviously close to my heart, given my background and whatnot. I will tell you that is less of a thing that anybody cares about, candidly. And I think the key value proposition is the unique operational approach that our technology enables us to do.
Okay, I think now is a perfect time to let's go into the technology then.
Yeah, how do you achieve this 50%?
Tell us the secret sauce.
The secret sauce is not too secret. It's actually fairly straightforward, candidly. And it's that if you're able to represent a construction project with more granular data, you can manage things better.
Hey everyone, and welcome to the Bricks and Bytes podcast, where we dive into construction and AEC technology. Before we get started though, if you're a startup founder or operator responsible for innovation in your company, or you want a deeper, more insightful look into technology in AEC, you won't want to miss our newsletter. From deep dives into particular technologies such as AI, robotics, design, software, and so on. Hot takes from investors betting big in AEC technology, and advice on building tech companies, including the stories and takeaways of the most successful AEC technology founders. Head over to www.bricks-bytes.com and sign up today to get this exclusive material straight to your inbox. And now for the episode.
This episode is brought to you by Build Vision, transforming construction supply chain by bringing contractors, manufacturers, and stakeholders onto a single software platform. Visit buildvision.io to find out.
So Salman, thanks for joining us today. How's it going over in sunny Arizona? I think that's where you are.
Yeah, things are great. First of all, thank you so much, Owen and Martin, for having me on. It's such so exciting to be here and talk with you both and the broader audience. And yeah, things are great. It's a nice, bright and early 6:47 a.m. here in Phoenix. But yeah, things are good.
I think you could be, you're definitely part of one of the earliest people from the US which was joining. I think the earliest was 6:30, which actually I think the time you joined us was 6:30 a.m. So you joined a special club. Congratulations.
Awesome.
All right, can you tell us, Salman, what inspired you to start Mosaic?
Yeah, it's interesting. I think there's been like two, life threads that I'll talk about at a personal level. One is more business technological, and the other is more kind of soft and mission orientation. And I'll talk about the mission orientation one first. But Mosaic from the start has been a very mission oriented and very mission driven company. And that mission has always been, how do we create places that people love, and how do we make those places widely available? And this was a particularly, important mission to me because it touched, it touched home. Growing up in the suburbs of Phoenix, where you see this huge, massive expansion of development and growth of the suburban landscape. And don't get me wrong, I love Phoenix. I grew up my entire life here, went to high school, went to undergrad here. But there's definitely a sense of isolation that you can feel in these growing, sprawling suburbs. And how do you create places that allow for economic growth, allow for the type of population scale, but also, feel beautiful to be in and honor who we are as humans. And it also is a very difficult problem. I think we generally know how to build like housing stock at scale. I think we know how to create nice, beautiful individual places. It's hard to do both at the same time. It's hard to replicate that thing at scale. And I think that was an overarching mission that we thought was worthwhile to work on. We felt, personally, it had a lot of personal significance, and we felt that there was a business case to be made around that as well. And so, yeah, started Mosaic, and the underlying philosophy behind us is, as a company, was always the fact that we believed that communities should take after the people that live there, and therefore the best way to honor this mission of place that people love that are widely available is not for us to create the iPhone or the Tesla of housing and just spam that across the entire cityscape, but rather was to empower local developers to be able to who have like that creative insight, that know their markets, that have the wherewithal of getting projects approved and so on. How do we equip them with better tools to exercise their art? And when we looked at that, it became very obvious that the biggest tool that was missing in their toolkit was construction. And we focused on that. How do we create better construction tools? And that eventually led to Mosaic, which is a technology-powered general contractor, allowing innovative real estate developers to use us to make their dream creative development communities come to life.
The technology-powered general contractor, what does it mean? Can you elaborate on that a little bit? So does it mean that you take the papers and replace with PDFs?
Yeah. So you were breaking up a little bit there, Martin, but I think I got the gist of the question. So yeah, as a general contractor, we build homes. Like that's what we do. We are the licensed entity that is responsible for pulling the permits, for coordinating the construction, ultimately has budgetary accountability and schedule accountability. We make money by building homes. We also build software that we use to make ourselves better at building those homes. And hence the technology enabled element. It's easier to say tech-enabled GC than, company that builds homes and builds software to make us better at building homes. But I think, the key focus around our technology approach has always been and will always be, how do we stay focused around the existing trades and the existing supply chains? How do we build tools that allow them to be more efficient at what they do, make it easier for them to work with us as the general contractor? As opposed to trying to replace them. I think there's a lot of...
Hey listeners, I want to take a quick break to remind you about the Bricks and Bytes newsletter. If you're interested in learning about the technology shaping the future of construction, you won't want to miss the valuable insights we share each week. To get this exclusive content delivered straight to your inbox, head over to www.bricks-bytes.com and sign up today. Link is in the show notes. Back to the show.
Groups out there, a lot of people out there looking at addressing these underlying broader macro issues around housing shortages and cost unaffordability. And I think there's a lot of different approaches out there, from the fully automated prefab to new material designs that have, both environmental and production, cost advantages. And then there's kind of the approach that Mosaic is taking, which is, let's not unnecessarily reinvent the wheel. Let's try to work within the existing resources, the existing tradesmen, the existing supply chain. And yes, resources are becoming more constrained. How do we make them more efficient? And we believe that there is a software coordination solution to bring to bear. It's not to say that we are opposed to the other approaches either. You know what I mean? I think there's more than enough space for, it's a big enough problem for all types of efforts, but we've primarily been focused on software solution that can improve coordination of on-site construction of residential housing.
So to recap, you're a general contractor, but software is used as could I say maybe the operating system for
Sure. Yeah.
how Mosaic
Our internal system. Yep.
delivers the product? Cool. So it seems like what I love about this and what you guys do is that, and you touched upon it and hit upon it there, is you're not completely trying to blow the construction industry out the water and change how everything is done. You're taking the existing way it's done and just sprinkling like a small but impactful enhancement. And then, like you say, you're not opposed to the future, like perhaps further technology in the future, but not going too wild and saying, oh, we're going to completely vertically integrate everything. We're going to put robots on from day one. It's like, use what's already there. Gentle disruption is the term that I've heard and love to repeat when I speak to people like you. So I like it.
Yeah.
How many projects and developments are you guys currently undertaking?
Yeah, so we're primarily focusing on the emerging build to rent asset class within the residential sector, which we'll double click on that. But just to like paint a picture of the typical projects that we build, they're not onesie twosie homes. We're typically building entire communities, entire neighborhoods. Our typical sweet spot projects are usually anywhere between 150 and 200 units. Usually single family detached, although we'll sometimes do like townhome product, 3, 4, 5, 6 plexes as well. And varying types of architecture within then, again, going back to our mission statement of not just building the exact same thing over and over and over again. And, right now we have just shy of 2,000 units under active construction. We celebrated delivery of our 1,000th unit late last year, which was an exciting threshold. But what was even more exciting than that milestone was, it took us the first couple of years to deliver 1,000, and we already have 2,000 right now under active construction. So seeing that geometric growth has been exciting for us, and about 5,000 additional units in pre-development or in the pipeline with our clients to date right now, primarily in the southern United States. So our largest market is here in Phoenix, Arizona. We're also active in a couple markets in Texas as well.
Salman, if you can say a little bit about type of the clients that you work with. And I said I was going to ask if it's one client or more of them, but you mentioned clients, so I guess there's more than one. Can you tell us a little bit about your clients?
Yeah, we actually have a fairly diverse client base. I think our largest client, and I mentioned the statistic just because I have started to appreciate how maybe rare it is within the real estate and construction space. But I think our largest client represents only around 15% of our revenues as a company overall. We have about a dozen or so, real estate developer clients in their active construction, and maybe another, 2 dozen or so more in pre-development across different projects across the United States. Typical customer profile, I mean, they honestly vary. Obviously, these tend to be, more established, larger, professional real estate development firms. These are not like the mom and pop type, fix and flip type operators. These are the types of groups that have the financial and operational wherewithal of getting a 250 unit housing complex approved, financed, and built. And so we work with both local real estate development firms as well as national build to rent platforms. And I'd use that term again, and I'll talk about that again just in 1 second. But our clients are the real estate developer, and we are not B2C. We do not work with the end unit, the end tenant that lives in the units, and we don't do any of the property management. We're purely just a general contractor. And our clients that we are ultimately accountable for is the developer on the project.
Go on.
So what is super interesting is like, what is your USP, and when you speak with a developer, like why would they choose you instead of like traditional way of doing it?
Because I'm curious also, Salman, because just from my experience and knowing how these developments work, they're usually speaking to a number of general contractors, interviewing them, etc., etc. And then, I mean, you guys like are very different. So when you come in, it must be like, oh, wow, okay, this is a slightly different approach. So yeah, if you could talk to that.
Totally. Well, first of all, I'll tell you what they don't look at is they don't, and I hope we're going to spend a lot of time kind of talking about the technology approaches and stuff like that, we've been focusing on. That's obviously close to my heart, given, my background and whatnot. I will tell you that that is less of a thing that anybody cares about, candidly. Um, and I think the key value proposition is the unique operational approach that our technology enables us to do. So when you look at so let me take the opportunity now. I think I've been teasing this build to rent term. Let me explain what that actually is in more detail. And I think that will provide kind of some insights in terms of how we do things, and why there's value that our clients view in that approach. So build to rent, or BTR, if I let that terminology or that acronym slip out, are basically purpose-built neighborhoods that are designed to be built and then all rented out. So it's almost like a hybrid between a traditional American subdivision and a apartment complex, where we're building individual single homes like you would see in a neighborhood or a subdivision project, but those individual homes are not sold, rather they are rented. And there's some variations, there's some differences in the product design. Most notably, these tend to be smaller units so that they're a little bit more affordable and you can get more density in a piece of property. Things like utilities and stuff like that are operated and run slightly differently because you don't need to have individual meters to individual units and things like that. But this product type is particularly interesting and particularly exciting in the backdrop of this affordability and housing shortage crises that are in parallel in many parts across the world, and certainly in the United States. And when you look at these projects, um, uh, they're almost these like weird uh, mashups of different types of projects. On one hand, it's a residential product, right? You're building homes. On the other hand, it's a single commercial plat that you are constructing. And so it's kind of this like weird hybrid between the commercial, the residential, the infrastructure worlds all kind of coming together. And I think that's basically kind of the key value proposition that we try to bring to the table is, when you look specifically at this build to rent class, which is a hybrid of horizontal work where you're putting in infrastructure, residential vertical construction, but also it's commercial paper with commercial obligations and so on. We try to bring the best of all the different worlds. And so one of the things that we often, talk about with our clients, and when you look at the space, there's kind of like two different alternatives, or maybe three alternatives that you would look at as a general contractor for your project. The first one is a commercial contractor, super sophisticated, really buttoned up, maybe very adept at certain advanced methodologies and whatnot. And they will stay on top of stuff. They'll be super, high quality from a reporting perspective, but they are able to achieve those efficiencies because they rely on very sophisticated commercial subcontractors, and those commercial subcontractors are in turn expensive. They, have there's more supervision that they provide. There's more technology that they put into place, and so on and so forth, right? Or you could hire a home builder, right? And the challenge, and a home builder uses residential trades as opposed to commercial trades. And so there's, typically significant cost savings there. They're usually more familiar with some of the housing and residential building processes and best building practices, but they're not used to building other people's products, right? If you're a large home builder in the United States, you have your product library. You're not used to and accustomed to building a product that other people have designed for you. In fact, a lot of the efficiency that you get from a residential trade base is because they've literally built that exact same house hundreds, if not thousands of times over and over again. Home builders also struggle many times because they don't do the land development. They buy finished lots and then they just build a vertical construction. Whereas in these BTR communities, you have to do both. You have to be putting in the infrastructure and be building at the same time. And so I think the advantage that Mosaic brings is that we like to say that, hey, we bring the best of both worlds. We bring the sophistication and the advanced construction methodologies of a commercial group. And we're able to do so using the residential trades that are more cost efficient and maybe more familiar with the product. And we're able to do that by being able to be better at what we do, and how we're better at what we do is predicated by our technology. So our technology allows us to stretch the residential trade groups to be able to deliver commercial quality, which is a great product market fit within this emerging BTR process. It also allows us to do very dramatically complex operational practices, things like slab farming, right, where we will start building slabs without and building up a queue of them, and then before releasing the framers. So advanced scheduling techniques along those lines. Being able to overlap vertical and horizontal construction, where we'll start building the homes before the roads have even been paved. But not only does this allow us to shave up to 6 months on a build time, it also creates a better end quality products, because by the time you deliver the unit, that road hasn't been driven on, for the last 18 months by heavy construction equipment and so on. And so I think that's kind of the key value proposition that Mosaic has, been able to provide. We're able to provide commercial grade service with residential pricing, with advanced schedule enhancements on top of both of those. And that's made possible by the internal technology system that allows us to manage that chaos of construction.
Amazing. But still thinking from a developer's point of view, they probably want to see the numbers. Would you be able to shed some light on differences in costs, or Mosaic versus some other general contractors perhaps, or maybe areas that you are more efficient and do things better?
Yeah, totally. So, I mean, the general numbers that we look at, and this is based on actual head-to-head comparisons on, some recent projects. When we compare our approach to a traditional commercial GC, there's almost a 30% reduction in cost in terms of the residential trade base overall. Yes. Oh, actually, no, not even overall. That's 30% in terms of the direct construction costs. So that's not even going to things like fee structures and contingencies and cost savings and so on and so forth, because we didn't necessarily have visibility into that information. I think we've gotten general feedback that we tend to be very competitively priced with our fee structure. So I would imagine the cost savings overall in the project are even perhaps more than that. And on the schedule time savings, kind of comparing to more traditional, finished lot home builders, about a 25% reduction in the overall schedule and cycle time for these projects. And again, those advantages are able to be realized by being able to do things like overlapping vertical and horizontal construction, which is usually a big no, not a big no-no, but it's usually something that people don't like to do because there's so much more complexity, especially when you're talking about these highly dense sites, right? Where there's a whole bunch of infrastructure going on, there's a whole bunch of trades. You're pouring concrete right next to a house, and you're flying in trusses right next to a road that's being paved, and all on that same day. There's a lot of overlapping pieces, but yeah, 30% on the cost savings, 25% on the schedule. And again, keep in mind that there's another implicit advantage that we like to think about, at least, which is this is all being built. This is all being done building our developer's product. Right. This is not us having our own product that we're building this stuff for the first time in many cases. So this is not a situation where we are sacrificing the design intent or the quality of the end community to make some of these things pencil. There's, in fact, in many cases, there's more flexibility that's provided in that context.
Okay, I think now is a perfect time to let's go into the technology then.
Yeah, how do you achieve this 50%?
Tell us the secret sauce.
Well, secret sauce is not too secret. It's actually fairly straightforward, candidly. And it's that if you're able to represent a construction project with more granular data, you can manage things better. You mentioned an interesting kind of, a point around Mosaic early on in the conversation about how Mosaic is kind of taking this gentle disruption style approach. I couldn't agree with you more on that front, and I think a lot of that has been rooted in my own that kind of maybe personal background. So I professionally and academically, my background is in software engineering and computer science. I got my PhD from MIT in computer science and was at Stanford before then. But I grew up in a construction household. And so I got a really deep appreciation growing up on job sites of the types of issues that happen that actually cause delays on projects. And the two underlying business philosophies or principles that we have adhered to as a company for Mosaic, and this is maybe, pardon the, we'll get back to technology in a second, pardon the small detour from like a business or investor or fundraising type dynamic. But I think the two principles behind Mosaic have always been that we want to minimize any third-party behavior change, and we want to be CapEx light, because we think that these are the two issues that plague most construction technology startup companies. The high CapEx of doing things is not in adherence with the cyclical dynamics of the real estate and construction markets. And if you require a lot of third-party behavior change, all you need is one group that is a weak link in the chain, and now the entire thing becomes more expensive than it was before. And again, I've never seen an issue on any of the projects growing. Oh, well, no, okay, never is a strong word. Most of the issues were not because the framer wasn't swinging a hammer fast enough, or that the most of the issues were not within a particular discipline, but rather between those disciplines. And I think that was the not a unique insight, because it's not really unique and it's very well known. But I think that was an insight that we wanted to exploit the most. And you do that by being able to by thinking about your project at a very, very small level, right? The problem is that when you're dealing with, the complexity of BTR and other large scale housing construction is not in complexity. Houses are, especially the way that they're built in the United States, are very easy to put together, right? The issues is not, the challenge is not with the complexity. The challenge is with the concurrency that you're dealing with. You're building 200 homes all at the same time, and it's really easy to let small issues creep up. The way that you solve those small issues is to represent the project at a very, very granular level. And that was a starting off point. We wanted to basically create a data representation of every single one of our projects, so that every single trip that every single one of our subcontractors' crews will make on our job site is known, is pre-programmed, it's pre-scheduled 6 months before the project even starts. And we call that approach, that theoretical approach, cost modeling, right? So you think about modeling in the construction and AEC space a lot. You're typically thinking about digital twins, where you have like a BIM model that represents a 3D representation of your project. This is almost like a financial representation of the project. It's every single dollar at the most granular level that's going to be spent over the entire lifetime of the project. And that was the starting point of the technology. The technology was, how do we enable that type of data intensity? Because there's a lot of amazing things that happen when you do that. It makes billing super transparent. It makes scheduling very easy. It makes issues when you're dealing with a problem with a client very transparent and very problem solution oriented, as opposed to finger pointing oriented and so on. But there's a problem, which is, when we're talking about the granular level, most schedule of values on a project in a contract basis, they're like maybe 30, 50 lines. This is how much we're paying for plumbing, this is how much we're paying for concrete, and so on. We will break a project down into 30,000 individual line items. And there's an advantage of that. There's also a cost to that. And that cost is, how the hell do you get mere mortals, especially in the construction industry, right, to be able to think about, reason, and manage 30,000 individual data points and orchestrate their project? And, the long solution there is, we've been spending a lot of time on tools to make that possible. And, we're starting to see the fruits of that labor. We, been building a lot of tools from a UI perspective to make our data platform more accessible. But most importantly, we've been spending a lot of time on what we call our SDK, which is allowing us to write code to manipulate this underlying data model, which unlocks tremendous amounts of efficiencies and things that are really simple to think about in practice, like, hey, our framers needs 3 more days, so just update all the framing schedules to add 3 more days and cascade everything, out after that. Or even better, our window installer can only do 10 installs a week. So make sure that there's no more than 10 installs for the window install, and then cascade everything from there. That's so simple to talk about. Just imagine going into Microsoft Project and manually moving things around, and that's the power of being able to write code to represent and manipulate this. And there's a whole bunch of other advantages as well that we can dive into. But in a nutshell, that's kind of the idea: is granular data representations and tools to manage that data.
Beautiful.
To unpack.
If you could maybe tell a bit more about the third-party behavior change, but within that, I would have a question. How do you track the behavior of trades or subcontractors? Is it daily reporting or every hour reporting, or you stick something to the helmets and it gives you information?
So yeah, so I think so double click on the third party behavior change dynamics. I mean, I think there's like very harsh third party behavior change, right? So like, hey, we're going to use this new wall system that no one has ever used before, or we're going to use aluminum studs instead of wood framing in a market that's predominantly wood framing for residential construction or things like that, right? There's like harsh third-party behavior change, in terms of the construction materials, the methodologies, and so on. Then there's also process change, where it's like adopt our scheduling tools, or you have to sign up for an account on this technology platform that we're using. And the reality is, obviously, like, we try to minimize both of those items. One of the key elements of us building our own technology solutions is that we can meet our trades and our subcontractors where they currently are in their systems. And so, a lot of our internal tools spit out schedules and 3-week look aheads and things like that are PDFs that can be easily emailed, or some cases text message to the foreman of our framing crews, or the plumbers, and so on and so forth, just because that's how they operate, that's how they run internally, right? And so I think those are the types of third-party behavior changes that we're really, really trying to minimize, is not trying to get people fundamentally retrained. And the reason why is that, I mean, if you do that, and again, one person doesn't get with the system, it compromises the broader dynamic. Now, don't get me wrong, I didn't say like eliminate, or there is no third party behavior. It's rather just to minimize. And the third party behavior change, in my way, should be opt in as opposed to opt out. So there's definitely more advanced things that we are launching for the trade partners that are excited and do want to try something new, or are looking for better, tighter integrations, or so on and so forth. Specifically around some stuff that we'll be actually launching later this year. Focused on our trades and their experience, but it will be opt-in. If you want to use it, we believe that you will be more profitable working for us. But if you don't want to use it, it's not a requirement. And I think that type of graceful degradation is better suited for the construction industry, rather than kind of playing the hard line. So I think that's kind of what we meant a little bit by third party behavior change. Martin, forgive me, there was another question you had related
it was
to
about
tracking.
how you actually get these data points. So.
Yeah. So the idea is that, we, at the beginning of the project, we decompose the entire project down into what we call these cost lines, which are these super granular representations.
Could you give an example, Salman, of what?
Yeah. So conceptually, it's like a who, what, when, where, and how much. So it's literally, this plumber is going to go to this house on this date, and this is the granular activity that they're going to be doing. This is how much they're going to be paid. This is the retainage on that specifically scoped item. And there may be a dozen of those on that particular day, right? But
does it go as granular as like literally walking from the site cabin to the place of work, or is it more the actual works items, like, I don't know, plumbing in the toilet? Yeah.
So it's more focused on the outcomes, but the outcomes themselves are fairly granular, right? So it's not just like plumbing, but it's like the box and wrap, right? For lot 17, unit 3, basically, right? And so it is outcome driven, but the outcomes are fairly granular. So if you take a look at a typical housing schedule or whatnot, it's about 300 individual actionable items, and each one of those multiplied by the 200 units in the entire project. and all are pre-programmed with the individual dollar amounts and so on and so forth. And that is what our our subcontractors, that's what our superintendents, that's what our customers see. And there's a tremendous amount of advantages in that regard, because from like a scheduling perspective, it's we just filter that data and they can exactly say, okay, these are the things I'm doing today. Our superintendents know exactly what's happening and they're able to check stuff off. When there's ever any disputes around, progress billing, this is a huge challenge in the construction industry when you're doing your pay applications and your draws with the lender or whatnot, and they're, you're saying, hey, framing is 45% done. Here's my draw request for this amount, and they say, no, it's 43%. Say, okay, well, send inspectors out. In our case, it's the beginning of the project. Here's the entire individual tickets effectively that are going to be paid, right? And here's exactly when we think we're going to be paying them. And if there's ever any dispute of like, no, that's too much, we don't believe the project is completed to that extent, it's like, fair enough. Tell us which of these items you do not believe was checked off that should not have been checked off. And we're not even going to argue with it. We think we're right, but we're not going to argue with it. We'll just say, fine, we'll move it to the next pay run. No worries about it. So it creates a tremendous amount of transparency there. It also serves as our data tracking as well. We do not do any additional data tracking beyond that. Just relying on the daily and hourly checks off that our superintendents do. And we honestly, the reality of for us to be successful, different superintendents have different personal preferences. Some people like to walk the homes and check them off as they go. Some people like to do that throughout the day. Other people like to do that at the end of the day, so they can spend the bulk of the mornings, dealing with actual operational technical issues. There's flexibility we give to our superintendents in terms of how they want to manage their work. But that's the visibility that we have in terms of who's staying on track, who's falling behind, what's the general capacity? Because this is not just again, remember the issue here is concurrency, not complexity. So it's not just latency. How long does it take to frame a house, but how many homes can you frame in a week? And so being able to, produce and calculate those aggregate statistics. And we're finally just now, candidly, starting to get to the point where we can do that at enough critical mass scale across different product types, across different vendors, across the entire market, where we're able to start seeing, actionable trends around, capacity planning and things like that. So that's definitely, we generally don't talk about, future products, but that's definitely an area that we're looking into.
We'll get to there. Does the technology you mentioned focus mostly on the output, like the line items within a construction project? How about more for the management side of things? Like example, maybe like you guys call it punch list, but we call it snagging over here in the UK, or I guess payment applications you covered already. How about like RFI management or stuff like that?
Yeah, totally. So I think our technology system internally is called Mosaic Hub. That's what we call internally. That's what we use to manage our projects. You can think of Mosaic Hub as like a series of concentric circles of different, core functionality versus more, optional / secondary functionality as you kind of go out in these concentric circles. So the core of it is the cost model, right? That's the data representation and the UI tools to manage that that representation, and the coding interfaces that we provide that allow you to also manage this. That's like, layer 0, if you will. Like that's the centermost item. But we should definitely talk a little bit more about some of the advances that we've been able to unlock with large language models, in particular, given that code architecture. So we'll definitely circle back on that front in just a second. Layer on top of that are what we call like the core business artifacts for the project. So things like budget, things like schedules, things like pay applications, right? Pricing agreements, which are the actual contracts that get executed, and change orders that get executed with our subcontractors. That's kind of like layer 1, all driven from the cost model, right? So in theory, you're not manually authoring a change order in the change order module and try to keep that in sync with the schedule and the scheduling module. As long as the cost model is up to date, all these artifacts, all the core business, the project artifacts are fundamentally staying in sync with one another, right? And then there's like the layer above that, which is like more of the stuff you were talking about, right? This is like the project management layer. The RFIs, submittals, punch items, turnover logs, things like that. And we include all those as part of Hub as well. But again, those are more, at the outer layer. The core technology is all driven by the fact that, hey, if you can have a cost representation of your project, you can automate all the outer layers, or if not completely automate, you can dramatically simplify them as you go further out.
Love the theory.
How do you approach then costing of the previous projects? I guess having so much data about what you just done on the previous project, probably the costing for the next one
Estimate.
is very simple, because I also guess that these units are very similar, and you're not building like multifamily build to rents, and then you're not building an office, right? Because that's not what you do. So it's probably very simple, prudent cost project for the next job, right?
Yeah, you just add 10% and submit your price.
How can you Google it? I mean, I think the data advantage you get from having this granular representation is huge, because it's not just us being able to pull from historicals in terms of what our actuals were on a price per square foot basis, but it's also being able to evaluate what types of operational practices were successful versus unsuccessful. Right? We tried this new phasing strategy, and did it work or did it not work? Or maybe it worked, but it didn't have the advantage that we thought it was. So it allows us to answer some of those questions in both quantitatively and then anecdotally, right? So like the quantitative dynamics are able to like pull, price per square foot information and so on and so forth. Anecdotally, if you had a hypothesis of like, hey, did we, phase one we framed this way, phase two we framed another way, is that substantiated with the data? You can actually go deep diving into pulling some of those insights out. We're actually now in the process of doing so at an even more granular level, because there is a risk, because you mentioned that these products are fairly similar. Yes and no, right? There are a lot of different items in them that make a difference, right? And don't get me wrong, these aren't like 20% budget swing items, right? I mean, we're talking about maybe 2-3% budget swings, but 2-3%. I mean, projects are getting, the underwriting these projects are getting killed over less than 2-3% even, right? Things are really tight right now from a real estate perspective. And so one of the things that we're now focusing on doing is trying to think about these projects of our clients through a lens that's more granular than just a price per square foot per scope, right? So framing cost this per square foot, or plumbing, but rather thinking about the methodologies or the standard details or the specifications that are represented within that project. And these specifications are obviously like very, easy to think about, right? It's like what type of plumbing fixtures you put in that building, right? But it's even more granular, right? Like, what was the slab thickness? What was the turn down for the slab? Was it advanced framing technologies used? We often think about things as like a price per square foot basis, but what were the plate heights on the homes? Was it a 9-foot ceiling and a 9-foot ceiling on the first and second floor, or was it 8 feet on the second floor and 9 feet on the first floor, or something different? And so we're now starting to be able to. It's not exactly to the point of design intent in terms of representing design intent into the cost model, but we are definitely trying to represent the construction practices into the cost model themselves, which is even more fidelity when it looks at cost information and schedule information.
So how big is Mosaic in terms of like a headcount?
Yeah, so we're about 60 people overall.
And that includes like a tech folks, or also people on the who are on site sometimes, or how does?
Yeah. So more than half of that is our operations team. So that's our superintendents, our our admin, our construction management teams, and so on and so forth. That also includes our technology, engineering, and data teams, and our go-to-market sales team, and so on as well. Obviously, are on the construction management side of stuff. We are 100% third party on the subcontracting basis. So those 60 employees do not include framers and plumbers and stuff like that. Obviously, the overall trade base and supply chain that we work with is, I think, last analysis we did is maybe up to 5,000 people strong. There's a robust network of tradesmen and labor behind it, but the core company is 60 people or so.
Okay, so 60 people, and you're having 2,000 units under construction right now. So how do you place Mosaic with regards to number of units per employee, or the other way around? Is it
Yeah,
I like efficient or not efficient? You must be thinking about it.
100%. And there's this dynamic, right? Which is, in some cases we are less efficient, and in some cases we're more, right? So the cards on the table, a traditional construction company GC doesn't need to hire software engineers. You know what I mean? And so that headcount is typically non-existent on that front, right? Let alone the headcount. The cost of an engineer is generally more than the cost of a construction admin. So you're talking about units per employee or revenue, but you can also think about revenue per employee, right? Not profitability per employee. These important metrics. I think right now the exciting time that Mosaic is in is that we're finally hitting that break-even point on the technology investments that we made. So we celebrated our 1,000th home delivered late last year. Also celebrated hitting profitability as a company late last year as well. Whilst going through fairly aggressive, I think there's several 12-month time periods, 2x year-over-year growth during that time frame. And I think to the point of like, does this business model actually work, right? And this is me taking off my CEO founder cheerleader hat and putting on more my academic hat of like, let's study Mosaic as a case study, like a business school case study, what works, what doesn't work. And I think the dynamic is that, well, you have a high fixed cost initially with the investments you're making in technology and so on, that should ideally create lower marginal costs as you continue to grow. And I think we're starting to see that. At least we're starting to see some significant evidence of that. So, I think over the course of last year, kind of straddling 2023 and 24, we more than doubled our revenues during that time period, and our headcount actually went down during that same time frame. And I think that is evidence of like, hey, there is leverage to be gained from the technology to be able to manage this work at greater and greater scale. We're managing multiple pay applications with multiple different clients on a monthly basis, in aggregate of tens of millions of dollars on a monthly basis. We have 2 accountants in the entire company, right? And so I think these are some of the proof points that we're seeing, and we're excited to push the boundaries. It's the typical easy to tell story where it's like, hey, we're making a huge investment in technology, but it allows you to scale. And we're hopefully entering that place where we can now start to prove that the scalability is unlocked. I do think that there is a geometric growth that we still have ahead of us as a company. All businesses eventually, again, this is me putting on my my academic hat as opposed to my fundraising cheerleader hat of like, no, we can grow forever, right? But no, the reality is that all companies, as they continue to get to larger and larger scales, find that growth curve starting to steep off. And I do think that we have a good couple of years of that, growth ahead of us, both internally in terms of operational capacity, but also in terms of what the market will bear. And yeah, I think, me thinking about the company in the 3 to 4 year time horizon is, at some point you're going to start seeing sublinear growth, not sublinear growth, but, I guess, compounding growth.
Yeah.
in those latter years, because you can only expand to so many markets in a certain year, in a certain time frame, and there starts to become rate limiting steps. And then, there's focus on on ways in which you can expand margins, and margin expansion becomes just as important as revenue expansion. And those are definitely things that we're focusing on. But yeah, listen, it's the nice thing about Mosaic is I think we have a fundamentally scalable business model. We don't need to invest a tremendous amount in capex. So there's little capital risk in that front. Our underlying operational mechanisms are very non-market specific. We can apply some of the same operational efficiencies in different markets, as opposed to only having our technologies or operational mechanisms work in certain markets. So I think there's less capital risk. There's the ability to scale, so you don't have to raise a tremendous amount of money to scale. We don't need to retool our systems to go to new markets. And so and we're operating in a very large segment. I mean, the largest home builders in the world, in the United States, do 50,000 homes a year, and even they are single digit percentage of market share in the overall market. So with all the stuff that keeps me up at night as a CEO, I come back to that dynamic where it's like, hey, we're in a big market. We have a fundamentally profitable business. We're starting to see those proof points that, hey, this thing does scale, and it does scale in a, earnings enhancing manner and a margins enhancing manner. And so, yeah, I'm excited for the next 3 years for the company.
And last question on this, guys. So, do you think you will be able to package the software in a package to other principal contractor that they can use it, and you can set a subscription?
Absolutely, and that's definitely an area that we're definitely excited and doubling down on in terms of future product areas is licensing the technology, number one, and number two is expanding the client base that we're focusing on as well, right? Right now we're primarily focusing with development shops. There are opportunities for us to work with directly with different capital groups instead, as an example, right? And on the technology front, in particular, not to lose that thread, definitely an area that we've been thinking about a lot. We realize, and in fact, I kind of gave this teaser dynamic around some of the enhancements that we've been achieving with large language models. There's an internal efficiency to that, but there's also a product to like a what is the word? To productize our technology implication to large language models as well. So bear with me, Mark, and I'll circle back to the packaging and making our technology open to others in just a second. But and I'll be completely honest, I think this is a story in which it's better to be lucky than smart, because I don't think we necessarily predicted this dynamic. But it turns out that, and this is no surprise and no shock to anybody, that one of the very few things that large language models are good at is just generating code. And it just so happens that we've been spending the last 3+ years developing a programming SDK to our cost model, right? And that is it gives us a huge advantage in this large language model world, because we don't need to train AI agents on construction. We don't need to create custom, fine-tuned foundation models that understand the intricacies of Arizona, Phoenix slab designs, right? All we need to do is give it our TypeScript SDK and have it generate code for you, and then we execute that code. There's another advantage of that as well, because it dramatically reduces the hallucination risk, because all the large language models are doing is generating code that can be audited before it's executed. And by the way, our cost model is completely version control. So if it does ever do anything stupid, we can always, roll back. It has this branching and forking mechanism similar to almost like a GitHub repo with our cost model. And so these elements, the fact that we have this branching version controlled cost model, the fact that we have this SDK on top of it, has allowed us to create tremendous amount of efficiencies, right? I talk about these situations where it's like, hey, our Windows supplier can only do 10 installs a week, cascade the schedule to make sure that, they never exceed 10 per week. That's impossible to do for a 200 unit project in like Microsoft Projects or a Gantt chart system, right? You can easily write code, and we've written all these scripts on our SDK. Now what we've been able to do is actually use large language models to generate that code. So you could do things like just say exactly what I said to you, and it will generate that code for you to be able to execute. The reason why this is important is twofold. Number one, it is actually what allows us to continue to scale and grow the company from an internal tool perspective. It also is what I believe allows us to deliver an engaging product in a packaged third-party format. One of the challenges with the cost model, candidly, is that it requires a certain degree of technical sophistication. And I'm not trying to besmirch the construction industry, but I don't know how many people in the construction industry would find it useful to have this type of a data representation and a system that helps you manage that. I think an AI agent that's able to be more accessible with that underlying data model now makes this very advanced construction system more accessible to broader people. And so we're really excited about this LLM innovations that we're seeing, both for our internal growth aspirations, but also to open up new product lines for us as well.
Very cool. There's so many ways why I order this. I go in there.
Yeah.
You're on a roll.
So, on the journey of Mosaic, what did it take you or in the business to pass the bar of profitability? And like, how did you make it really? Because like we spoke with many founders, and it's probably even a quote what I would say now. Some would say, when we speak about startups, profitability doesn't exist really, right? So like, how did you break it?
It's a good question. I haven't thought about it in that lens. I mean, I can talk about the financial and operational reasons that led to us being profitable. But the reality is that it's not too groundbreaking there, right? In terms of like, yeah, we have these fixed costs, we have these variable costs, we have to hit this growth number, and we're able to hit that, hit those growth and sales targets. I think the one thing that maybe was a mindset that was permeated within our entire company that I think allowed us to be super successful is this idea that there is no free lunch, and there is no rush. There's no shortcuts to be taking, and we have to embrace the fact. I mean, I know it sounds so naive because you think about things like profitability feels like such a basic fundamental of any business. And there's also like a survivor bias when you think of all the companies you know about. The companies you know about are profitable because otherwise you wouldn't know about them, right? But the reality is that profitability is not the norm in companies, let alone within startups. And I think there's this desire to take shortcuts to race to an exit, to race to profitability and things like that, when the reality is it's a grind. And I think that was a mindset, cultural mindset that we have within Mosaic. For what it's worth, I think that cultural mindset was facilitated by the merging of the cultures of like tech and construction, right? Where one is more, say, high flying, the other is more, no pun intended, grounded. Allowed us to have a little bit more patience, humility as a company, and it prevented us from doing stupid stuff. And I think that was, it allowed us to stay focused, it allowed us to stay disciplined, it allowed us to not feel like, we want to get this thing done in half the time, but say it's going to take what it's going to take, and let's be realistic about that. And I think that realism, that humility, has been the number one differentiator that I see within our company, maybe relative to others. So I think focusing on that, focusing on customer excellence, and the last thing is focusing on our trades. I can't say that enough. Our trades have made us profitable. We haven't done anything in that regard, and I think that that admiration of your trade partners is something that I do not see in the construction industry a lot. The trades are often viewed as replaceable commodities, and they might be by the definition of those things like at an academic level, yes, there's multiple framers you can work with. We like to treat our trades really well, and we don't get it right all the time. And we will absolutely raise your hand. And again, I think it goes back to that cultural mindset of being patient, of being being humble, and being respectful, specifically of our trades. I can't think of any other thing that allowed us to achieve the milestones we have, other than those three cultural mindsets.
Um, I think we've run out of time. There's much more I would like to unpack on technology, but
Yeah.
I'm glad you kind of segued nicely, Salman, into the trades, because we are at an interesting point in history, with shortages of labor and perhaps a new government which is going to impact, well, especially in the US, is going to impact the number of available trades. So, you mentioned it, but I got from doing my research on you guys that you put a lot of time and effort into looking after who you work for, and you've built technology specifically to enhance the experience for the tradespeople that work for you. So could you explain like some of that technology, and maybe then to that? No, go for that first, and then I will follow up with the question on myself.
go.
It's too convoluted.
I mean, it's not, again, it's nothing rocket science here, right? What we want to do is we want Mosaic to be a more profitable GC for our trades than other GCs. And you talk about, shortages, constraints, and stuff like that. Like me now, again, putting on my selfish Mosaic hat. One of the things that we realize that we do not need to solve the fundamental macro labor shortage issues in the United States for us to be a wildly successful business, right? It's kind of the idea of like, we don't need to outrun the bear. You just need to outrun the person next to you. All we need to do is be a better GC, a better builder than the folks down the street, and the trades are going to want to work with you, right? And I think, that is, I mean, I'm happy to talk about like broader macro policy issues and things like that. And I don't know to what extent I'll be able to speak on it better than anybody else, but internally, that is the secret sauce that we have. And I can talk a lot about the things that you can do to make the lives easier for your trades. And I think that's kind of the focus that we've been taking in that regard. And the technology follows that. I know you asked specifically on about the technology items. It is, I think there's two things. It's not rocket science of how to keep a trade partner happy. Number one, treat them with respect. And number two, make it so that they can make more money on your project than other people's projects. How do you allow them to make more money on your projects compared to other people's projects? It's not just by accepting a higher bid. In fact, that's usually, I do not see a tremendous amount of evidence as to how that correlates with them being profitable, because they can charge a lot, but also deal with a really mismanaged project, and they lose all that additional money that was in their bid. At the end of the day, it's how to make it easier for them to produce the bid to begin with, so the pursuit costs are lower, making it easier for them to get scheduled, so they have visibility and they can able to plan around things, and make it easier for them to get paid, so they're not having to deal with additional overheads and so on and so forth. All three of these different items have been the core focus of the technology, and they're implicitly built in to the idea of the cost model, right? We're literally baking every single pay point for every single unit for the entire project, and breaking down their bids across that. So before they even go into the project, they're able to look at their schedules and be able to do a full cash flow, assuming the project stays on schedule, right? Of the entire project. Scheduling the exact same thing, right? We're able to do a full project reforecast as often as we need to, and they'll see not just which units are starting when, but when their specific tasks on their specific scopes are starting, and then making it easier for them to get paid. They don't have to invoice us, right? They're not, asking us for a work order, running a crew, generating an invoice, sending it to us, following up with it. We check off, they know that they see the entire ledger, we check it off, we send them, here's what we're paying you for, right? If you accept it, sign the lien waiver via DocuSign and you're done, right? There's literally no paperwork that they have to do in that regard. But again, it's not rocket science. Treat them with respect, make it easier for them to bid your work, make it easier for them to schedule so they have predictability, and make it easier for them to get paid. And that's, again, implicit into the design of the cost model.
Perfect. Could it be that you have all the data, right? So could you almost be saying to your trades like, look, your bid is going to be this much, and we will guarantee you, because we have the data and we know, don't spend your time estimating it. We will guarantee you'll get paid this much for it, and if we don't, then whatever will cover the excess cost.
Yes and no. Yes, certainly so. We're not approaching it that way, and for two reasons. Number one, um, uh, you know,
Maybe trust issues.
well, no, not some of that, but taking that tact, you know, it can be perceived as a jackass move, basically. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so I think
Yeah.
the better, even if we get to the same, even if we get to the same outcome, you know what I mean? At the end of the day, but there's another reason for that as well, which is, um, you know, a like as an example, when you're when you're framing a house, right? If there's a certain framing practice that is allowed to be done on that house, it can dramatically shave the complexity for that unit, right? For that framing crew, or when you're pouring concrete, right? They think about things in terms of like when you talk to a lot of our concrete trades, they'll say that we lose money or we make money not because there's more volumes of things, but we lose money whenever a concrete truck has to back up. Like literally, whenever they have to reverse, that's when we're losing money because that's an expensive thing. Our crews can't do stuff. The next concrete truck can't get into place. And so once you start internalizing those dynamics, that's when you're able to get to these like collaborative cost saving dynamics. Because I'm uninterested, candidly, in knowing what people have that we've paid people in the past and maintaining that, which is what this data-driven approach would take. I'm more interested in how do we drive costs down even further below that? How do we set new standards of cost efficiencies? And that only happens with collaboration. We're doing that, on a routine basis. It's, like I would say a good I'm probably having 2 to 3 meetings every single week with different trade partners. Like, 90-minute, 2-hour meetings with every on a recurring basis, just finding ways in which we can optimize how we work and how we build stuff for them. And again, it goes back to that specification idea that I mentioned earlier of how do we program in the specifications into the cost model? Because once we have that, then I feel comfortable saying, hey, concrete guy, if we have this specification, what is your actual labor rate? And can we become programmatic in that regard? It's not no, it's not different, not that different to how the automotive industry does stuff, right? Where, Ford will produce a car and they'll have all the maintenance, like, requirements. And they'll say that, hey, to do an oil change, it's estimated to be, 3 man-hours or whatnot. You know what I mean? To do that. It's probably too much for an oil change, but you get the idea, right? They're able to cost out the actual procedure that's being done. That's the level of detail that we want to get to on our construction projects because that's more in line with making sure our trades remain profitable and continue to make money. It's very collaborative and it allows us to achieve lower cost savings because as opposed to just maintaining whatever the average was when we started collecting data to begin with.
Easy. One more question.
Yeah, so you mentioned that you have these conversations where can you see some savings? Like, what I'm asking is, like, do you see in which area do you see the largest, like, a margin opportunity grab within general contracting, like based on all of the data you've collected within Mosaic?
Yeah, what's the most inefficient area of construction? Tell us.
I mean, this is going to be well, first of all, I think the reality is that every single construction is fundamentally local. And each project will have their own locally driven challenges. There's always going to be that one trade or that one scope that's going to be the most complicated, and it's hard to predict that ahead of time. And I know that's a little bit of a cop-out answer, but I do think that is a key, something that is the reality of construction development. The other dynamic, and this is a very much not self-serving comment, but I think the biggest opportunity for cost savings is actually the fee structures for the general contractors. And I know that I have a very non-vested interest in kind of saying that, but I believe, and it is mine, I think Mosaic's aspirations to try to find ways in which we can drop our fees over the long run. I know a lot of our trade partners. I know a lot of the subcontractors and stuff like that. it's a thin margin business for them, right? And sure, some of them are charging more margins than others, but when you have to factor in the risk that they're taking in, where if there's a single construction defect issue that comes out, that like they're pretty much done and they're gone. I don't know how much more there is to squeeze in that regard. Materials and supplier type informations, that's a relatively efficient market, candidly, and those market prices are set. There are certain, I won't name names, there are certain suppliers and certain materials and whatnot that definitely have monopolistic style postures in the market, which is problematic, but I don't know if that's a candidate for us to find cost savings. I think it's the paper pushers. I think it's, the more that we can automate, the more that we can allow the trades to work amongst themselves, the less supervision that's needed from the top, and people justifying their jobs and justifying their existences. I think that's probably the area that we're focused on the most. We're trying to make the interstitial construction process more efficient. What's the poster child of that? That's the general contractor. That's what they do. I hope that, attacking about 5-10 years from now, how many units do we have under construction? Yeah. I hope that we're charging a fraction of the fees that we're charging right now. And I think that accretes the benefit of our subcontractors, meaning they win more work through us because we're more competitive with our fee structure. It means more projects are being built, which accretes to the benefit of our clients, and more housing is being constructed, which I think, accretes to the benefit of folks overall.
Oh, so much to go. Look, we're out of time. Salman, could you tell people where they could find out more about you and Mosaic?
Yeah, absolutely. You can find both myself and the company on LinkedIn, and also our website, which is mosaic.us.
Thank you.